Hello, this is Attorney Carter Budwell, and in this section, we're going to go through section 2 of your questionnaire, dealing with your property. Now, a lot of you before calling us may have thought, well, I don't have any assets, but everybody has them. What we want to determine with this is that you don't have any assets that would be in danger if we file bankruptcy. So the first asset that we talk about is real estate. So do you have any real estate in your name? And you'll want to put the address and the name of the mortgage lender. The estimated value of the property, if we're doing a Chapter 7, we'll typically look at Zillow. If we're doing a Chapter 13, we'll probably more likely look at the tax assessment. And then you want to list how it's owned. So is it just in your name or just in your spouse's name? Which if it's just in your spouse's name and you're not filing bankruptcy, then you don't need to list it. Or is it owned jointly by you and your spouse or by someone else? Now, a lot of this information we'll get when we get your most recent mortgage statement, but it's good to fill in as much as you can here. And it's very rare that we have clients who have more than one piece of real estate, but it is possible. You would also want to mention here if you have a timeshare. Now, you likely won't have a mortgage on that, but you do want to mention if you have a timeshare. But let's talk about a section of the questionnaire that's going to apply to virtually everyone who ends up working with us: personal property. So personal property is just property that is not real estate. So it can include, your household goods like furniture, that's tangible personal property. And it can also include intangible personal property, things like bank accounts or retirement accounts, things like that. And one important thing to remember, we do look at values for personal property, again, to make sure that it's not something that's in any danger. For example, let's say if you were filing bankruptcy, the court will want to know if you have a very valuable piece of artwork, because if you have something that could be sold to sell all your debts and it's not exempt, the court doesn't want to give you a bankruptcy. So when we're looking at values, though, it's important that you remember that we are looking at used values, not what an item is worth if you were to buy it brand new, but used. So think about how much money you might get in a yard sale, or if you took it to a pawn shop or something like that. It's usually a whole lot less than what you paid for it retail. And we gave you this little sheet here to help you kind of calculate what your stuff might be worth. And in some areas, it might be a little bit out of date. You can always cross it out. So you can cross this out and, say, I guess even CD players would be a little bit out of date, but you can cross it out and put like MP3 or something like that. But remember to use used values. Now, the first real specific piece of property that we look at that's personal property is your car. Just let us know if you have a car and what the year, make, and model of the car is. And other information you can put in if it does not run. That's a good thing to note. And then value of the property. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. We are going to run an NADA search on your car the day that you file your bankruptcy. So just pay attention to your odometer. And again, make sure you know how it's owned and if you have any other vehicles. And then this would be a good place to mention, like if you have a four-wheeler or a boat or a kayak or something like that, and then give an estimated used value. By the way, a good place to check for used values, you can always check on things like eBay or something like that. That can give you a good idea of what something is worth used. So now we're going to talk a little bit about household items. And the first little one on here is your household goods. So things like your furniture, appliances, kitchenware, bedding, and you want to mention if you have it. Now, as far as the description, you may not be able to list everything in here, but you can give a general overall description, like kind of like over here, like furniture, bedding, things like that. And remember, value is usually going to be a whole lot less than what you paid for things retail. We have $5,000 to exempt things like household goods and electronics. And if you're married, you and filing jointly, both you and your spouse will have that exemption. So it would be $10,000 if you're filing jointly. And generally speaking, that is usually more than enough to exempt all of your things at used value. And so electronics, you also want to mention things like, your TVs, your phone, things like that, and give used value. Collectibles, these are things like art, paintings, coin collections, things like that. Go ahead and mention if you have it. And if you're not sure what it's worth and you think it's valuable, it might not be a bad idea to look at taking it to a pawn shop or something and finding out what it might be worth. Just because a lot of people might think that they have something very valuable that really is not valuable. I've had clients who they had what they thought was a very valuable watch, only after having it valued to find out that it was fake. Another thing that might be a good idea to mention in here is if you have a collectible that you think might be valuable, mention if you inherited it or not, because if you inherited it, that can actually give us an extra exemption that we can use. Sports, photo, exercise, or hobby equipment. So if you have like any weights or anything like that, and again, the used value on those is not very high. Firearms, again, used value is not very high. I bought a gun once from a range here in Virginia Beach. I paid about $250 for it. A few years later, I sold it back to that store and I only got about $40. So again, guns, they don't keep their value very well, typically. Now, this is an area where I've seen a lot of people make mistakes. They may think they have thousands of dollars worth of clothing, and you may have paid thousands of dollars for your clothing. But again, remember, we're looking at used value. So a good idea would be go and look and see what they're charging for the clothing that you have at like a thrift store or something like that. Like a t-shirt at Goodwill, you're going to pay maybe $3 or something for. Now, jewelry, there's two kind of categories of jewelry. Wedding and engagement rings, you want to make sure you mention those separately because we have an unlimited exemption for them. But things like costume jewelry, necklaces, rings, watches, things like that, go ahead and mention them. And again, give that used value. Pets, now don't worry, you're not going to lose your pets. Pets have an unlimited exemption. We usually value a pet at around $100. Obviously, you know, really no amount can adequately account for the love that a pet gives you. But think about like if you have a pet dog, what your dog would cost if you went to a kennel or something like that, or to a rescue shelter. Professional health aids. So this would be the most common ones I usually see are CPAP machines or nebulizers, but it can include anything. And again, if it's prescribed by a doctor, it is something that has an unlimited exemption. But and you can look on Google and something and see what they're worth. Now, cash, you may just want to put down how much you typically carry on you. We'll check and see how much you have on you the day that we file. For your bank accounts, we're more concerned that you just tell us who you have open accounts with. Now, we want you to include all accounts that are open. Like even if you have like a savings account that only has $5 in it, you want to go ahead and mention that. As far as the values go, we're not terribly worried about that right now, because what we're going to do is the day you file bankruptcy, we're going to have you give us a statement from your bank accounts for that day showing what you have. But go ahead and, you know, list any checking or savings accounts that you have, any certificates of deposit, or any other type of money account that you might have money on. Mention if you have any stocks or bonds, and it's just important, again, to note the name of the stocks that you have. So if you have Apple stock, mention that. And then the next one that we really look at is your retirement. So if you have a 401k or an IRA or a TSP, something like that, go ahead and mention it here. Value, again, if you have one of these, we're going to be asking for a statement. So if you give us the statement, that'll usually be sufficient. If you do know the value of it, though, please go ahead and put it on there. Security deposits. So this is typically something that you'll have to pay with a landlord. So if when you moved into your apartment, if you rent, had to pay a security deposit, go ahead and mention what it's worth here. Again, it's not something that we usually see that causes any problems. Other companies that we typically see that require security deposits would be utility companies such as Dominion Energy or something like that. Go ahead and mention if you have any prepayments. So like if you have a gift card or a prepaid card like Chime or Green Dot, or if you have any prepaid rent or something like that, you know, like rent that you've already paid a month in advance or something like that. Go ahead and mention that here. An annuity, this is just an annual payment that you get from a company that you've worked for. It's honestly very rare that we have them, but if you do have it, please go ahead and mention it. An education IRA or a Section 529 or 530 account. This is something that, you know, you've set up for your children's or your education. Trust, life, estates, and future interests in property. Now, this one sometimes causes a little bit of confusion. This is an interest in property that you have now. So this doesn't mean that when it says future interests in property that you may inherit when a family member dies, but this means that something has already been deeded over to you. So you have something that you could sell right now. If you don't have that, then you can just check no here. Patents, copyrights, and trade secrets. So if you wrote a song or something like that and got it copyrighted, go ahead and mention it here. The value is honestly usually not that much unless you've had a lot of people listening to it. Licenses, franchises, or other general intangibles. So if you have like a business license or if you operate like a Chick-fil-A franchise or something like that, mention that here. Tax refunds owed to you, we usually look at, you know, what you got last year as a good indicator of what you might get in the next year. And we're only looking at what next year might be. Or if for the more current year, if you're still waiting on your return, go ahead and list this. Alimony and child support. So this would be alimony or child support that is owed to you that is in arrears. Definitely make sure you mention that because that's a 100% exempt asset. Other amounts that someone owes you. So if you've loaned money to somebody or if you've earned some money that hasn't been paid yet to you, go ahead and mention that. Cash value of life insurance policies or other insurance policies. Typically, we're only going to see this if you have a, whole life insurance policy. If you have term, then there's likely no cash value. But if you have term life insurance, maybe just mention here term only. Inheritances, estate distributions, and death benefits. Now, this is usually going to be a no for you. Just as a heads up, when we do your petition, we will say possible inheritance for $1. That's just something that we like to put on there to show the trustee that we've covered it with you. Personal injury claims. So if you think that you might be suing somebody or that you have sued someone for personal injury, go ahead and mention that here. If the amount is unknown, that's okay. We can list it as unknown, but we want to go ahead and mention it and exempt it because personal injury proceeds are 100% exempt. And then other lawsuits or possible, rights to sue somebody that you may have, go ahead and mention those here. And any other financial assets that you can think of that aren't mentioned up here. So if you have something and you're not sure where it would go ahead and list it here. Now, business-related assets, this would only be if you owned your own business. So, take a look down here if you have any of these items. The most common thing that we normally see is machinery. So say if you cut hair and that's your primary business, things like your scissors or razors, things like that. Office equipment, and again, remember to use used values. And in this last section, it's very rare that we see these. So if you have commercial farming or crops or commercial fishing equipment, go ahead and mention them here. So that's about it for talking about section 2. And my next video will be on section 3. But if you have any other questions about this, just give us a call and we'll be more than happy to help you.